The first thing I'm going to do is ask Janice to just give a little introduction about herself and wCap, those of you that aren't familiar.
Thank you, Tiffany. It is an absolute pleasure to join you today, and a warm hello to all our guests. So my name is Janice Sambaza. I'm a partner and CIO, Chief Investment Officer at wCap, an institution that was started with the aim of providing funds to women-owned and women-led businesses in Zambia, with the hope of expanding to the rest of Africa. But what we offer as well is advisory services for those businesses that require any handholding or any assistance in order to get themselves investor ready. We will offer that service as well. My background is in finance. So I'm a chartered accountant by profession and have been working in the finance field for the last 20 years of my career.
So as you guys can see, Janice is a good person to get this perspective about corporate governance. And the main thing I want to do in this is to have a bit of an informal chat, really, about the elements of corporate governance. So those of you that don't know me, my background is in management consulting and mining engineering and business improvement. And working with ICA, I go through the investment readiness assessment for a lot of the businesses that we work with. And I've seen common trends come up with the issues in corporate governance. And a lot of it, I think, starts with the basics of understanding. And it feels like a massive topic, particularly since it's often framed in terms of big organizations. I think we think corporate and we think Enron. And when we think Enron, we think, well, corporate governance help at all? And I think, the thing, so Janice and I had a little chat yesterday as a, preamble to this conversation. And for me, the really important thing is that corporate governance is it's amazing to feed into your investment conversations and your due diligence, but fundamentally it's an operational, it's a massive operational component. So good corporate governance supports business operations. So whilst it's something that you will have to have for due diligence conversations, it's something you should have in place as early as possible, and it evolves with your business. There's a direct correlation between the complexity of your corporate governance and the size of your business. So the first question I'm going to pose to Janice is, what is corporate governance?
So we can use a textbook definition, but it's always a good place to start, and then we'll put some context in there. So, the easiest and most easy to understand definition was that I found on Investopedia. And it says that corporate governance is a system of rules, practices, and processes by which a firm is directed and controlled. So quite simply, that's what it is. Guidelines that will help in managing and directing your business. But in addition to that, it also helps balance the interests of stakeholders. So your stakeholders are your shareholders, management team, customers, suppliers, financiers, the government, and the community. It helps you manage the interests of all those stakeholders in your business. Essentially, that's what corporate governance is.
And so, that's why, obviously, the point that I made earlier about as your business gets bigger, your corporate governance gets more complicated. And that's also because you get more players involved. We work with growth stage businesses, and you guys work with growth stage and startup. So you can see how the more investors you have, the more senior management you have, the more you need to start taking ownership of your processes, and that ultimately leads to, and this is again where I bring it back to operational performance, is that your corporate governance pulls from your operational performance. So when you define a metric, and if that metric has to do with your financial reporting, it's still something that is an indicator of the health of your business operations. And that's why investors care about it. They don't care about it because they want to tick boxes. They care about it because it shows what you're doing well or poorly as a business. So next question to move on to, sorry, is the, All right, is why should businesses care about corporate governance even before they are seeking investment? And we've kind of covered that already in the fact that it's something that you build up with time. That said, so I mean, those of the SMEs that have engaged with the resources that we have on the ICA platform, you'll note that we often direct you to the due diligence checklist. And it's kind of a reverse engineering, because we know that you want to get to the point where you're investment ready and you can have those conversations with investors. But to do that, you've obviously got to go through all the steps that require the building blocks for that investment readiness, and building in your corporate governance. So, all right, so I wanted to ask the question about what does good look like then in small business?
Okay, so you've asked me two questions there, Tiffany, and I'll answer both. Let's start with the second question of what good looks like. And good is relative, like with anything. And even when you look at listed companies, they use the King framework of governance, and that in itself, it's not a rules-based framework. It is one where you call it pick and choose what suits you, and you can mold it in your particular organization. But there is what is called standard best practice. So I will say good is relative, but we'll dig into that a little deeper. And when you want to look at small businesses, you want to kind of be able to see what do the shareholders, what are they expecting from the business, first of all? And with that, what is management, how is management going to deliver on that? And what is management going to do in order to ensure that the rest of the organization adheres to that? So that's where the framework then comes in, because you need to be looking at how many meetings are we sitting in, you know, who is approving certain transactions, and you know that's called the delegation of authority. If the business is going to, if the CEO is going to move on, who's going to take that role? So the succession planning. So it encompasses holistically on all facets of the business. And in order to establish a good governance framework, you need to be able, it needs to be setting a strong foundation for the business. And we'll talk about what probably investors look like a little later. But what a good corporate governance framework helps organizations in is in having the management step back, because you find in small businesses, the shareholders are the ones running the business. And if you're not careful, it's like you're in a hamster wheel on a daily basis. You're running continually, trying to make sure you catch your sales, make sure your business developing. And you know, every day there are all these curveballs that are thrown at you. But corporate governance also forces you to step back and report on what you've done and report on what your strategy said you should have done, and compare, are we doing it? If not, why? But more importantly as well, it helps you look at your business in the long mile. You know, where are we planning to go as an organization, and how do we get there? And then help you track that as well. Ensuring accountability, because as management, you need to be accountable to the board or to the governance structure that is set up. So when we say what is good, it would be a situation where you've got a board of directors who is independent, avoiding circumstances where the board members are your buddies, the same buddies you go hanging out with, having functions with, or golf on a Saturday afternoon. But it's people who are objective and independent, with a strategic mind frame, with the right qualifications, who will really query the decisions you're making, and have robust conversations that will help you stretch the way you would have thought of a particular issue or question the approach you wish to take on a particular instance. So to me, that's what good corporate governance is. Sound systems where as management, even though you're a shareholder, you still have people who make you look at the business holistically, who open the doors for you when you need doors open, and create access to markets when you need them.
I think I'm going to unpack a few of those elements. And I agree with you. I think we could circle back to the first question I asked, because I think we're going to build. And the first question I asked was, why is it important? Why is it important to look at governance for SMEs now, regardless of whether you're looking for finance? And I think we're just going to answer that question the whole time we're talking, basically. I think you raised one really important point, because I know that for a lot of businesses, first of all, as you said, you're on the hamster wheel, especially at the moment in the aftermath or during COVID. Everyone's just trying to stay alive. So there's this idea that when someone says to you, have you considered your corporate governance? Again, there's this idea that it's something that feeds into reporting, or that's its sole function. And obviously it's not, it underpins operations. But you mentioned something about pick and choose. Like a lot of SMEs, they sit and they go, but I wouldn't even know where to start. And I can read handbooks upon handbooks and articles about corporate governance, and I still wouldn't really know where to start. And that's why I mentioned, a due diligence checklist is almost a good place to start, because it'll highlight the things that, yes, you absolutely have. Financial reporting, must have it. These are not options. There are elements, that you'll look at. I think I mentioned to you yesterday something like an equal opportunities policy, right? Where maybe you haven't thought about it in terms of something other than a box checking exercise. Like a reporting framework, you go, well, I'll just go on organogram, dotted lines. But the important part is actually to internalize and to understand and to recognize that those elements add value. And as Janice says, you pick the ones that add the most value. It's the 80-20 rule. 80% of your effort, you get 80% of your rewards, right? So, and focusing on the elements that will support your business operations. And I realize, it's tough to find that thinking time. It's tough to consider governance and the elements thereof and how you build them into your company to make them more than an output, make them more. Well, we have quarterly meetings and we take minutes. And I read something really interesting that said, like, a good indicator of function, like the pure function and effectiveness of a board, is that by reading the minutes, it's not just a rubber stamping exercise. It's not just a, look, we wrote some minutes. It actually has content. It shows thought. It shows direction. And we'll get more, I think, into talking about the board. Because we talked about it briefly yesterday. So you've mentioned like the whole purpose behind a board. So I asked you this yesterday, and I'll ask it again. Like, so for a lot of small businesses or growing businesses, they don't yet have a board. So I think they rely more on their senior management to take on that kind of directorship role. So when do you think is the right time to start looking at assembling a board?
I would say immediately.
Okay.
Because for small businesses, the most challenging time is the first 18 months. And, I'm based in South Africa, and there's a stat which says 75% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years. And the reason for that is because, it's a cliche saying, but it is true that it's a very lonely journey as an entrepreneur. And definitely the first few years are the most difficult, and you need that support from a board. So you might actually find that as much as best practice might say a board needs to meet quarterly, you might find that you actually need to have these people around you every single month, because you constantly have to reinvent yourself or repivot depending on what product you're putting in the market and how the market is perceiving it. Sometimes you might have to change your approach. So I would say immediately to that. But in addition to that, it's not just anybody that you're putting around you. It's people with diversity. So diversity of views definitely needs to have an industry knowledge so that the conversations and the robust discussions you have are actually strategic and useful to the direction in which your business would have. So expertise is important. Qualifications are important as well. I've sat in meetings where they say, what skill sets do we need? And you might need a marketer, you might need someone with tech, you might need someone with a finance mind frame. If it's a technical business, you might need an engineer sitting there with you as well. But really people with varied expertise who will be able to, I'm very big on the rigor of the conversation, because it means, when you set something or strategy down, it's something that's been well thought of and definitely for the good of the business at the end of the day.
And I think that's a really important point as well, as you mentioned strategy, and loads of businesses, you know the fundamentals when you are setting out, and you're gonna, that at some point you're probably gonna have to secure finance, and that investors gonna ask for some critical things like pitch deck, strategic plan, business plan. If you establish your board, and your board should be, as Janice says, it's trusted advisors, it's people you can work with, it's the hard and the soft. So yes, someone who on paper ticks the boxes, and I think there's also something to note there about, as Janice says, you want people who have got the right set of skills, they've got the market knowledge, and they may not necessarily be able to offset some of the costs that you may incur. So thinking about professional services, businesses that will have to pursue marketing, legal, advisory, financial advisory services. Obviously, if you get the right board member, they're not going to do all of that work for you. They may be able to support you in informing who you approach, how you approach them, how you scope it. Which ultimately can result in a reduction in the cost of those professional services, and ultimately mean that you have someone there who's a trusted colleague who can explain to you and help integrate that into your business. And now I've lost my train of thought a little bit. But so sorry, you were talking about the boards and selecting the right people. Yes, ultimately these should be people that, and I asked the question yesterday of how do you find them? And I mentioned maybe you start cold calling people on LinkedIn.
And my response was, it's a method, but it might not give you the best results, because usually what works is when someone refers you. Because when someone refers you, they comes with a recommendation. So if you're going to ask a person to sit on your board, especially if it's a startup, you might find that they are not getting the fee that they should for the hours that they spend because of the expertise that they give. But because of a recommendation that would have come from someone they value within their network, they'll be able to give that to you. So usually it's easier if you have someone recommend you, or someone who's had a relationship with you, to say yes, to invest in your business, as opposed to cold calling on the internet.
Also feeds into that softer side that I mentioned. You've got a skills list, obviously, but you need people, and for a lot of people, as you mentioned, 75% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. People, these are their babies. People invest everything in their businesses, and you don't really want to let strangers or people that you don't necessarily get along with into the fold. So you need people that you can work with and that you can trust from the start, which helps a lot when it's someone that is being referred to you. So they're a known entity. As I mentioned, like dating, you want to go on a random blind date. Ideally, you would have somebody who has previously vetted or can give you some background. And this also plays into when you engage with investors later, because of people that can give you advice and who will also be involved with the investors. And that partnership is partnership from the start with your board, and it demonstrates how you can build those relationships even when securing and after securing finance.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the golfing buddies.
Yeah.
Which brings us into the family business side of corporate governance. And I posed the question, it seems as important, if not more important, to have well-established, well-defined corporate governance frameworks in family businesses. Because there's almost an added risk factor. And again, we always talk about this when we engage with our SMEs and they complete their investment readiness assessment. We flag it as a risk because we say, you've got a family business, and investors will almost apply more rigor than they would with a non-family business. But so first of all, like, why do you think that is? And secondly, what additional elements or what elements would be examined with more scrutiny?
Okay. So to answer that question, I will take a few steps back to a question, that I'd want to elaborate on to establish why you need corporate governance in the first place before investment. And then I'll talk about what investors look for in a business and why this is important in an investor. And in going through that, I'll also touch about, you mentioned family businesses, why governance is then important in a family business setup. So if you look at business or corporate governance, strong and effective corporate governance helps to cultivate the culture of integrity within an institution. And that results in positive performance. So it means you're hitting your numbers, but in overall a solid and sustainable business, which then makes you that 25% that passes the 5-year mark, of a business being able to be sustainable. But what is very important with corporate governance, it helps you set up efficient processes, and you're able to see errors within a business or potential loss. For example, there might be theft that might be going on either of inventory or in your financial systems. You'd be able to pick that up through rigorous corporate governance structures. It also helps you in reducing costs, because in many instances you'll be able to remove any duplications of costs or any instances where you see, there in particular costs are too expensive. You'll be able to almost iron out all those things because of the rigorous review process that your financial management process takes you through. It also allows through proper documentation, as in a board setup, you have to produce board packs. If there's any anomalies in your business, you're going to have your board members asking you key questions of why certain things are the way they are, which will help you rethink the way your business is currently set up to also ensure the growth in revenue and reduction of cost to increase profitability. What is also important is the smooth running of operations, to ensure that they are accountable individuals. You know who to ask questions if a ball is dropped. You know who to go to if you need certain things done or certain things approved. So it really helps in ironing those kinks. And then importantly, maybe nothing is more important than the other, but compliance to regulations, to laws, depending on the industry that you're in. And when you now hone into family businesses in particular, because of all these points that I've mentioned, you will find that the biggest challenge in family businesses is probably the father is the voice of the business. You do what dad says. And in other instances, there might be family squabbles because you don't treat me like that because I'm your older brother. You can't tell me what I'm saying is not correct. So corporate governance helps in setting boundaries, establishing accountability, and managing conflict of interest. So you won't find the management team giving themselves 20% salary increases and the rest of the team 3%, because you're going to have a board asking for justifications for such increments. So it keeps them accountable. But what it also does is it establishes a long-term vision for the business and succession planning as well. You'll find in most businesses, it is almost a given. The oldest son will take the role of CEO and the dad will then move to chairman. But if there's proper processes in place, it will, there needs to be a method to that. Is the older brother the one who's the most qualified or exhibited the skills that allow him to take the reins as CEO? Is that what the business needs at the moment? For example, you find in some instances when investors come in, they might propose a shift in that structure because they're seeing that the CEO might not have the skills that the business requires for it to go to the next level. And then I'll now touch on a question that you asked on why is corporate governance important to investors? So we've already established what corporate governance is and what is involved in corporate governance. And it is evident that corporate governance is important because it ensures transparency and accountability. And to investors, this is very important because it also means there are fraud prevention mechanisms which will limit potential loss and liability for them. Because what's very important to them is, if I'm going to put my money in, am I going to get my money out? Or if I'm going to put my money in, am I going to get the returns that I was promised 5 years into my investment? Or is the money I put in going to be used for what it was said it's going to be used for? And because the investor cannot be sitting at a desk in this business on a day-to-day basis, the comfort comes through from knowing that the sound corporate governance process is in place, because if there's any anomaly, red flags will be raised, would be able to review it, because in most cases, an investor might want to sit on the board, will be able to review it, will be able to analyze it and question it and pick it up before anything hectic happens or anything blows up. You mentioned Enron earlier. Of course, we wouldn't want to imagine that, but definitely good corporate governance will assist in alleviating some of those blow-ups.
And in allowing you to align what every level of the business sees, essentially. Yeah. From a performance management point of view, especially in mining, we were always focused on the value chain, and that's so that you can optimize your delivery, exactly what you've mentioned, but you can also have a continuous feedback loop. I think, you alighted upon a really important role of the board, which is essentially to ask questions. Yeah. Look, go, this isn't what I was expecting, or why is this number the way it is? And that answer may be because of something completely unprecedented, but the point is that you as a business owner should be able to provide that answer. And that if somebody asks you why turnover hasn't been what it is, what it was expected to be, and again, benchmarking against some of the key documentation, strategic plan, business plan, financial model, being able to hone in on that, and again, where your board has got the skills to do so, they should be able to provide positive input into that feedback loop. Yeah. So advising on how you may be able to improve the output of your value chain. Yeah, so I think you've circled back very, very nicely to the first question, which is, why is it so important to have corporate governance from the beginning? And I think another element, particularly in family businesses, although this applies to every business because every business is built on relationships, is that creating those clear boundaries, accountabilities, transparency, and highlighting the fairness right at the start mean that if people do attempt to take liberties, or if they don't know where those boundaries lie and they push them, you can say, whether it's to a family member or to just another board member, we agreed that this is where the line lies.
Right.
And whether it's your brother or your sister or your mom or dad, whatever it is, they might still be mad at you. They can't be as mad as when it appears that you are giving, when you maybe appears to have a bias or are acting in one way that favors, because you're not, because the structure was laid out and it was documented.
Right.
And I think, you know, there's this idea that documentation in itself, the idea of paperwork being arduous, yes, it can be, but these are records. These are things that you can refer to, and they allow you to have an evidence-based approach. And just because something's written down doesn't mean it can't be changed or evolved as your business grows, but it means that you've got defined steps for how it changes.
Yeah.
You know, so you know when you're going to invoke a discussion with the board, and it's not just about this overlord that's influencing how you run your business. It should be about how they can add value, how they can make you think,
Yeah.
and engage with you in how you transition your business. I have a couple of other questions written down. Picking the board. Right. So we talked about the most important characteristic of a board, and I think you've already elaborated upon the most important elements are having, you know, that value add, that skill set. That's so important. But the really poignant word is independent.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be a member of your family or a member of your social circle, but it should be someone that meets those criteria about the value add, the right skill set, the right network,
Yeah.
the right approach. And I think it's really important for small businesses to realize that, you know, business owners, you should always feel like in any negotiation or relationship building, you should be ready to and have the ability to walk away.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're being pressured into doing something, making a choice like that, remember that this is the future of your business, and that you're shaping it right from the start. And that's what corporate governance supports, having a clear strategy, knowing where you want to be, that feeds into who you select and how you build the framework. Which brings me to, we talked about, I'm a small business. This corporate governance thing sounds great. How do I know where I need to target my corporate governance? Where do I know? How do I figure out where to start? I'm going to let you have a go at this first, and then I'll spin around.
Okay. So before I answer that, I wanted to share a little story, because we were having conversations with a client at wCap, and the discussion was around, you know, who do you think should sit on the board? And one of the people that selected was a guy who used to be a subordinate when they were in corporate. And the question I asked was, are you sure he'll be able to question you? Because my fear was that this guy might still sit and say, oh, this is my old boss, you know, I need to be prim and proper. I can't say anything against her strategy. And she said to me, oh no, that's exactly why I have him on the seat, because he questioned me. And you know, everything I put on, he would give me such rigor that my thought process is sharpened. And I thought that's absolutely fantastic. Is, as you say, it doesn't mean it's someone who's completely new or out of your circle, but if it's someone who can sit there and be objective and question you with strong rigor, then they deserve to be, you know, on that actual seat. And then to answer your question, what can you do as an entrepreneur? As I mentioned earlier, the biggest challenge entrepreneurs have is you have to juggle all these balls all at the same time. And then now here we are, excuse me, throwing in corporate governance into the mix. And you've never heard of this animal before and you need to figure it out. You know, I know ICA has a checklist, which kind of helps you ascertain, what you need to have in place. Question, do you have certain aspects in place? So it gets you thinking. But for some individuals, that might not be enough, and they might not have the time to read lots of articles out there on corporate governance and small businesses. So there are institutions like wCap that offer advisory services, almost hand-holding if you want us to assist you with the implementation, but really be able to see the gaps that you currently have in your business and recommend how you can remedy those gaps through discussion and then presentation of a report to you. That is definitely a good way in which you can have the comfort that at least at this stage of your business, you have what is best practice to ensure that your business is optimally run. But as Tiffany said earlier, as your business grows, corporate governance also evolves.
I think, that I always think of it in terms of something where if you start out with the core, and even if that is, if you're going to document a process, document a value chain process. You're going to define performance metrics, define the ones that are absolutely critical to your value chain, like number of widgets produced, or because I'm in mining, number of tons hauled, and you'll find, like, as soon as you start looking at those processes, you start asking more and more questions about what feeds into them. It may be IT support systems, and then you start looking at your accountabilities, and that all feeds upwards, and it's all part of the flow of information. In terms of, where to start with corporate governance, working in the ecosystem in Zambia, we're very aware of the fact that there's a gap in the knowledge. It's why we have, as part of ICA, we've included, as you mentioned, checklist, and you told me that you guys also have a checklist.
Yeah.
And that checklist, I reiterate, it's the place to start. It's the place that, we give our SMEs an output report that summarizes the gaps that we see in their investment readiness, which are effectively gaps that they have in output reporting of their operations, or actual gaps in process definition in their operation. But that just, that gives you that's like your starter pack. And as you say, you can go away and you can research every single one of those items, or you can prioritize them. But a lot of SMEs would say, well, but now I know where the gaps are, but how do I figure out what gap I'm meant to attack first? Yeah. And so we've got our resources, our corporate governance resources on our platform, which we always advise SMEs, you go and you look at, and the ones that you feel confident in doing and developing yourselves, you can go wild. But then there are a large portion of what we do is to help them inform scope when they engage external advisors, whether it's off their own bat or as part of a program, a donor-funded program such as ones with Prospero, where when they engage with technical assistance so that they are getting the best out of that advisory service. When you go into, I used to be a management consultant. I know what we used to do to clients. Clients often don't know what they don't know, and you come in like a wizard, and you know things that they don't. When actually it's your business, you can take accountability and ownership of that. And the areas that you don't know, you probably do know them. It's just about formalizing them so that when you talk to investors and you can establish procedures and accountabilities and reporting lines, will all support that. So that's why when we produce our output report, the idea is to help SMEs develop a targeted response. So that if you've only got a certain budget that you can apply to advisory services, you're going in with a prioritized targeted list and a better scope for being able to, so when you sit down with an organization like wCap, you are able to absorb that information and in your most critical areas develop your internal capabilities and capacity. You're going in with questions rather than just like, help me, I don't even know where I am. And I think, you know, having an informed client is way better than having one who doesn't. Because the difference between what we do, and I include wCap in this, and management consultants, is that we're not trying to take advantage of anybody. We genuinely try to make things better for SMEs.
Definitely. And we've always seen that way. It seems simple to us, but it might not be simple to the entrepreneur who's sitting across the table from us. And we're trying to make sure you have a sustainable business with the sound foundations. And we're happy to answer all questions to ensure that even you understand why you're doing what you're doing. It's not, you know, just about ticking the box. It's about understanding why you're doing in order to ensure the growth of your business in the long run.
And you know what, I think there's a really important point that we haven't quite said yet. You know, you've talked about operations, you've talked about, and it feels like corporate governance is this beast that you've somehow got to eat, right? Every piece you complete, corporate governance, whilst it all feeds into how you can report, because it is an operational foundation, it helps your operations be better. Every single component you develop is something that will probably save you time in the long run. Because when you establish sound reporting, it means you're not going to have to run around trying to figure out where 3,000 kwacha of inventory has gone.
Yeah.
You know, when you've got well-defined processes, you don't have to fight tooth and claw to make people understand you and understand where the boundaries are. These are all things that ultimately streamline your business and help you feed into that continuous feedback loop. So, you know, when you've got a performance metric, you can look at it and you can go, I can identify where the problem is. You can go and fix it.
Definitely.
And I think, given that we are now bordering on 45 minutes, we had better end this.